Welcome. Thank you all for coming. This is a very popular topic. We are thrilled to have so many people here today. My name is Cary Tyson. I'm the Director of Community and Economic Development here at the Kennebec Valley Council of Governments. This is our quarterly Community Economic Development Strategy meeting, and it continues to grow in popularity and based upon its topics. I want to recognize my boss, Laura Sear, the Executive Director of KVCOG here. Before we get started, if you wanted to say a word or two.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. I know it's tight quarters and it's warm in here. Let us know if you need to open the window. And just really thank you for the investment of your time in this event. This is such an important issue. And little plug, we are recording this. It'll be listed on our website. If anyone has questions, got lost in the shuffle, you'll be able to read off the store that whoever excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. And folks may be asking questions online. This is such a popular event. We're going to discuss doing another one later on in February or early March. But I'll leave that for another time. Since we've got a full panel and a full house, I'm going to do very quick introductions and turn the information over to our panel of experts who come at this from a variety of different backgrounds and expertise. I'm not going to read their entire bio to you. It should all be on the page. And if any of this material you need, please do let me know. You all know how to get a hold of me since you RSVP'd for the meeting. I'll just start in alphabetical order on the back. We're going to go in a different order as you'll see on your agenda. We've got Ben Axelman here with Nexamp, and they're a full-service public solar energy company based out of Boston. So we wanted to have the private sector represented here as well. To that end, we also have Mark Bergeron with TRC. So two private sector folks. We've got Sophie Janeway, who will be our first speaker. She's with the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and she's going to sort of set the tone here. Sadie Mudge is a municipal energy planner, and she's going to give you sort of the local perspective from a planning perspective. And Nick Lund is with Maine Audubon. Full panel, a lot of expertise. We're going to talk. They're all going to be about 5 to 8 minutes apiece. And then we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers. So, like I said, the folks in the satellite room and online will be writing stuff down, and they'll bring it to me as your moderator. I'm going to keep this on task and on time. So, with that in mind, I'm going to shut up and turn it over to Sophie.
Hi, my name is Sophie Janeway, and I work for the Natural Resources Council of Maine. Just by a show of hands, how many folks here are familiar with NRCM? Great, got some familiars, got some new people, that's great. For anyone who's not, we are a state-based environmental advocacy organization, and we work in Augusta and around the state to empower the voices of Maine people and to protect Maine's environment now and for future generations. And we have been working with a whole bunch of other people for many years now to try and bring more solar energy to Maine for the environmental benefits, for the economic benefits. And so today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we've been on solar in Maine, what happened in 2019 that's getting everybody so excited about it, and where we're going as a result of that legislation. So where have we been? For a number of years, Maine has been in last place in the region for solar energy jobs and solar energy development. So while the rest of the region, the rest of the country, and the rest of the world have been gaining solar jobs and all of the opportunity of solar, Maine has been falling behind. Despite broad support in the legislature from a bipartisan perspective, that helps. Backwards regulations and vetoes of bills were keeping us in last place. But in 2019, that changed. But in advance of that, before the bill changed, Maine towns were moving forward and installing solar because they knew it was good for the environment, they knew it was good for their bottom line, and they knew it was good for our electrical grid as well. So Belfast, you'll hear more from Sadie, is currently offsetting 90% of their electrical load with solar. Waldoboro installed an array on their landfill. Waterville, right next door, installed an array and is looking at installing more. Is anybody here from Waterville? Awesome, a couple of folks, great. And that one up there is the other Belfast solar array. So in addition, Shapley, Lincolnville, South Portland, and a whole host of others. But it hasn't just been municipalities that move forward. Businesses were gaining advantage of solar energy, like Mount Abram in Greenwood and Geiger Brothers in Lewiston. And so in 2019, sorry. So in 2019, the legislature passed a bill to support solar energy, and that bill was LD 1711. And so the bill did a number of different things. It lifted the cap on the number of participants that could be in a community solar project. So community solar is an array where residents, businesses, municipalities can remotely connect their electricity account and get credits for generating solar energy. The other things that the bill did was initiate a competitive bidding process amongst developers to ensure that competitive, cost-effective projects are being built. And so Ben is going to talk a little bit more about all the components of the development timeline, but this bill really initiates that this process is going to happen in front of the Public Utilities Commission. And those rules are all being figured out by the PUC right now. And project development is underway. So to give you a sense of scale of the solar development that is coming to Maine, this is a 1 megawatt project on South Portland's landfill. And between municipal projects and commercial projects and things on people's rooftops, we have about 55 megawatts of solar. 1 megawatt is about 5 acres or 3.5 football fields or 86 tennis courts, but nobody really knows what 86 tennis courts look like. And as a result of the legislation passed, we're looking at an increase of 600 to 700 megawatts of distributed generation. And if that sounds like a lot, it obviously is, but consider the fact that Massachusetts has over 2,000 megawatts of solar energy installed, and they also have, not coincidentally, over 12,000 jobs in the solar industry. And I think that is one of the most exciting things, is that this opportunity, which other states have been enjoying, is something that Maine is really starting to get a taste of now in more ways than we were before. So I think that whether it's for the bottom line, for the environmental benefits, as a response to folks in the area, Maine municipalities were already moving forward, and now it's just become a lot easier to do that and to take advantage. And as solar continues to move forward in Maine, there's going to be opportunities for people to connect as residents to a community solar project, to connect your business or your workplace to community solar, or to be siting community solar or other solar in your community. So thank you so much for coming to learn about it today. I'll pass it back to Dave.
I'm Sadie Lloyd Mudge, and until recently I was the planner in Belfast, and now I'm just managing energy projects. Belfast has the most installed solar of any municipality in Maine. Hopefully soon that will change because some of the larger municipalities in Maine can now install much more than they could before, but for now we're still holding that crown. We had the first system on a landfill in Maine. This one was our second solar array, and this was installed in December of 2015. And most recently, we installed a system on a new piece of property that was about 32 acres. We needed a new public works facility, so the city went out and purchased this property and reserved about 5 acres, which is this space right here,
to do another solar array. And that solar array at the time was the largest system that the PUC would allow you to install in the state, which is a 660 system. That's the same size that the South Portland system was that Sophie showed you. So the public works facility would go here, and the solar array would go here. And this is that facility. It's now been running for a little over a year, and it generates approximately $110,000 worth of electricity each year. And then we also get REC credits, so renewable energy credits that are sold on the market. And between these 3 solar arrays, Belfast offsets approximately 90% of their electric load. So how much you offset, what percentage, is going to be based on what your municipal load is. So that's buildings, facilities, pump stations, wastewater treatment. And because of this work, we designed the public works facility that we designed to go with this, has no annual fuel bill because it's connected directly to this solar array, and then we also used waste oil to heat it. So it also allows you to be a little more creative with some of your longer term energy planning. With the passage of LD 1711 that Sophie talked about, it allows much larger systems to be installed in your municipality. And most of these are probably going to be done by commercial installers, and you're going to hear from one of them today. I wonder how many of you in here know that your town has been approached by a commercial installer to do a large system? Okay, that's great. So you probably have a lot of questions. Are any of you have you already, or are you looking to develop an ordinance? Okay. So when I spoke in Millbridge, most of the people there, a lot of those towns don't have zoning, and so it's a lot faster for a developer to get in there. But for towns where there is zoning, most of you are probably going to have to design an ordinance. And we had to do that in Belfast. There wasn't commercial solar use listed for our table of uses or allowed uses. So the first step was adding that to the use table. Some towns could take a different approach and say if it's not on there, it doesn't mean you can't do it. But for Belfast, it needs to be explicitly on there. So that was the first thing we did. And then we worked with the planning board through a typical process through developing an ordinance to create an ordinance for solar. And so one of the things that we recognized is that solar is a relatively good neighbor. There are things that we look at when we do larger developments like a new tractor supply that don't really apply with a big solar array because you don't have people coming to the site very often. You're not even probably gonna have one vehicle a day. Maybe not even one vehicle a month. There's no noise. This isn't a place that's lit up. And so really the things that we focused on were the kind of buffering and setbacks. We weren't looking to hide a system like this, but more make sure there's some green space between the neighbors and the solar array. And then we started, vegetation management was another big issue. Any developer is going to need to manage vegetation under the solar array so it doesn't grow up and block the solar array. We have to manage this with our systems in Belfast. And the planning board, it was really important to them that they encourage developers to look at natural vegetation, so wildflowers and things like that, and to allow things like animal grazing as opposed to being required to mow it every year. So that's something that they worked into their ordinance. We first looked at ordinances in other towns. There weren't very many in Maine because most hadn't been approached by commercial installers like this before. I would recommend if you are looking, the Thorndike one is really organized in a way that's easy to understand, and it says a lot of the same things as the South Portland and Portland one. We deviated a little bit in Belfast from some of that because all 3 of those ordinances were based off of the Massachusetts model ordinance. There's nothing wrong with that, but over time, it makes sense to look at something and decide whether it really fits for you, especially as our own climate is changing. So those are the ones that we looked at, and I would encourage you as a starting point to look at those as well. And then the Belfast one would be available as well. We've heard a lot of concerns from people. There's been this fear that solar is going to come and take over your whole town and every open field is now going to be solar. And one of the things that we learned, which I think is really important for people to understand, is that the amount of solar that your community or town can accommodate is going to be based on the size of your substations. So in Belfast, we have 2 substations, and between the 2 of them, they can accommodate at this point up to 4 large solar arrays. So when you think about in the whole town, 4 fields may turn into solar arrays, that's not very scary. It also means that all of our farms are not going to go away because we have many more farms than 4 in Belfast. The other thing that is a controlling factor is the proximity of the land to phase 3 power. So if it's not within a mile of phase 3 power, it's probably not going to happen because it's very expensive to extend phase 3 power. And at least where we are in Central Maine Power Territory, you have to pay for the extension. We have to do that for the new public works facility for this system in order to have one this large. So that's another controlling factor. So as we start to get to some of these more rural places where there's not as much phase 3 power, you're unlikely to see these larger systems. There is some, the other thing I would know, I think there's been a lot of discussion about the farmland issue, and you know, in Belfast, we felt like we never say to people, you can only ever have one use on your property. So we would never say, you could only ever have a commercial store here. And we would never say, you could only ever have farming here. It's not really how zoning works. Sometimes we say it needs to be residential uses or commercial uses are more appropriate here, but we're never going to say one use. So if somebody wants to restrict their property to only allow farming, it's more appropriate to do that through things like an easement that they would do as a private property owner. As well, we have heard from some people that they want the opportunity to make some money in a different way through part of their property. And so that's a choice that's up to them. Lastly, I want to note that in the beginning, there was a lot of question about whether there would be any tax value back to the municipality through a system like this. The process at the state is still ongoing, determining how much would actually go back to the state for the property value of the private property value of the system itself. They have a draft plan. We'll see if it goes forward. But between for Belfast, and Belfast has a fairly high mill rate, so this might be a little higher than some of you. But between the increase in property value at the town level and then the expected amount back from the state for a 5 megawatt system, we would be looking at roughly $55,000 in tax money back for that one system. So again, it's great to have that money. Certainly if we had the 4 systems that were built out, that would be more money. But that's just something to keep in mind too, that how much you get back is based on how many systems. There is a rebate, or there is a process too for residential, but those are obviously much smaller. So the money you get back for a residential system would be $100, $200 per system. So I'm going to leave it at that and pass it on as we get to the end. And there's questions. If you have more questions about the ordinance process or what the planning board did or other things that towns need to consider, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
All right. Thanks, everyone. My name is Ben Axelman, and I work for Nexamp. Nexamp is a solar energy development company based out of Boston. Basically, our business model is to develop, build, construct, own, and operate solar arrays. And we have been in business for about 11 years. In that time, we've become a leading solar development company in the Northeast and elsewhere. We've built several hundred solar projects at this point, with over 150 megawatts of solar operating and about another 100 under construction right now. And we're also backed by a subsidiary of Mitsubishi. So that's just a little bit about who we are. I've been at Nexamp for about 6 years and developed a pretty large number of projects, most of which in Massachusetts, although now we're currently active in Maine and hoping to develop projects under this upcoming solar program that was enabled by the legislation that Sophie went through. So what I thought I would do today is just give a brief overview on who is the solar industry? Who are the companies that are active in this industry? What do we do? How do we make money? And what are we looking for when we're active in these communities? Just to give you guys a better sense of where we're coming from and help you understand basically what we're looking for and whatnot. So there are a number of different business models associated with solar companies. There are residential installers, people who install and develop, more commercial scale projects. By commercial, I mean, in the 1 to 5 megawatt range where you're selling power locally, as enabled by the bill that just passed this summer. And also there's utility scale solar projects. And I know there've been a handful of utility scale projects proposed in Maine. Those are usually on the 10 to 100 megawatt scale, looking to tie into actual transmission lines, export power usually to Massachusetts or Connecticut. And that's not really our bread and butter, but there are certainly companies out there working in that. There are also companies that are purely developing projects and then looking to essentially sell them to other companies who will then own and operate them and make a profit that way. You may run across some of these pure developers when you're out there, and there are also companies whose model is to actually build, own, and operate these projects and make a return by selling power. There are also companies who will just do it as a turnkey. They'll build a project for you, you'll just pay them to build it, and then you get to own the project. That happens more on the residential scale, but there are some larger companies that do that. In terms of how we make money, we make money by selling electricity, selling renewable energy certificates. We receive a federal tax credit, the investment tax credit that we need to monetize. And then there are also development fees, especially if you're in the develop and sell model. So basically this is saying, what makes us interested in a solar site? What are we looking for when we're looking around for sites? We're looking for sites that have good solar access, obviously. We're looking for sites that aren't shaded by anything, that are that are going to be open, that are going to get a good amount of solar insulation every year. We're looking for properties that don't have environmental restrictions that would prevent us from being able to build there. So, we look at the same restrictions that you run into for any sort of development, where you need to avoid wetlands, need to avoid endangered species, need to avoid, permanent, easements on the property that would prevent the solar use. Grid access is something that, was previously touched on, but this is very important, especially for commercial scale solar projects. Having a robust grid there, having 3-phase power, having a substation nearby is going to really bring down the cost of tying into the grid. And given that this is a competitive market and it's all about producing electricity at the lowest possible cost, the cost of tying into the grid is a pretty large portion of that, and can lead to if you are applying for something and you need to reconductor a couple miles of lines or pay for a big upgrade of the substation, that can make a project uneconomical, and you're going to lose out in the auction this summer to a project that didn't have to do that. Constructability, also very important. Just how much is it going to cost to build this site? Is it flat? Are the soils easy to work with, or are they all ledge and you're going to need to really break up the ground? Do grading, that type of thing. And then compatibility with existing land uses are also very important. This is something, making sure that, it's not, directly up against a large subdivision with a lot of abutters who are going to have to see it, that type of thing. And this is something that is often looked at in the town planning process, but it's also something that we do look at ahead of time to find sites that are going to be, in line with the community and their desires. This is just what do we need to do in order to build a solar project somewhere. First of all, you need site control. So if you're building a project on someone's field, you need to have a lease with that field. And I'll go into these in a little bit more detail in a second, but you need to have the rights from the landowner to be able to build the solar project. You also need permission from the local government and potentially the state as well. There are also some projects that might trigger a federal permit, but you need to get permission from all relative regulatory agencies in order to actually build this project. You need to have permission from the utility to tie into the grid. 2 minutes. All right. Power sales. I'm sorry about that. And figuring out how much you're going to be paying in taxes. So just to quickly run through some of these, what does a land lease or a building lease look like? You can either purchase the land or have a lease that goes forward. Typically, it'll give us a couple years to put all of our project together and develop it, 6 months to construct it, 20 to 40 years of operating once it's in place, and then requirement to remove everything and take out the project after the fact. On the permitting front, we are always subject to town's local ordinances. Maine is a state where there's a lot of local power, so the towns have a lot of leeway to decide where to allow projects and under what circumstances to allow it. There are also a number of state level permits that we can trigger, such as site law is the big one. If you're developing a commercial project that's over 20 acres in size, you are triggering the site law development application, which is a multi-month process through DEP. If you are, say, under 20 acres but are impacting wetlands, you also trigger some DEP permitting. And depending on the site, you may also trigger the Army Corps review. Lastly, you need to get approval from building inspector and electrical inspector for all of these projects. For rooftop projects, often that's all you need, but that depends on a town-by-town basis. Lastly, this is something that we've talked about briefly already, but the process for getting permission to tie into the grid is to, you tell them, hey, I want to tie in X amount of power at this location. They will do a study to determine what are the impacts to the grid of putting that much power on the grid here, which is impacted by the voltage of lines, the existing load on the circuit, and other solar projects that may already be operating. They come back to you with a list of upgrades that you need to do in order to safely tie into the grid and meet their reliability requirements. They can't tell you no, but they can give you a cost that comes back that is so high that the project doesn't work. Then you sign an interconnection agreement with the utility. You pay that amount to the utility, they do that upgrade, and then they let you tie in. So that's just a very high-level overview of the types of things that we have to look at when we're developing solar projects in the area. Running out of time, but happy to answer any questions in more detail. Thank you.
The music interlude comes to you.
Yeah, Nick, if you want to just stay towards the front.
By the way.
You're also professional dancers.
That's right. That's right. Good morning. My name is Mark Bergeron. I am a regional manager at TRC. We are an environmental and engineering company in Augusta that provides environmental and engineering services to solar developers. We also have a lot of relationships with the municipalities in terms of redevelopment sites, brownfields, landfills, those sorts of things. I think I have a more senior audience today. Who remembers David Letterman from the Late Show, his top 10 list? I don't promise to be anywhere near as funny as Mr. Letterman, but I want to go through the top 10 questions that towns should be asking about solar projects. And a lot of these have already been touched upon, but I want to just kind of reinforce some of those. Why are we talking about solar in Maine? As you can imagine, things changed a little bit with the new governor and the new legislature. So that really shifts the tone of the conversation in terms of what's supported and what may not be as supported here in Maine. And solar and renewables are one of those things. We've talked about some of the legislation that's been passed. So that makes a huge difference. That sends the message to developers that, hey, maybe we can build these types of things in Maine. So expect more legislation in the future, because I think this is just the first wave. Sometimes we call it the solar coaster, because it's this huge wave right now, and we hope to keep this wave moving. What types of projects are we talking about here? Again, Ben already talked about some of those, but the ones that we deal with mostly are the large scale, the grid scale utility projects that connect directly into the grid, that sell power there. So we're talking the 5 acres, 20 acres, 500 acre projects, where we're working with different clients those types of projects. They can be located almost anywhere, green fields, farms, forests, but also brownfields. If you've had a contaminated parcel in your town that's been cleaned up and is ready for redevelopment, solar's a perfect place for that. Again, landfills, those are also a really good place. It's already been developed, so why not put some solar panels on it? Another area that we're seeing a lot of interest is inactive gravel pits. There's probably a lot of gravel pits around in your towns, so think about maybe using some of those because, hey, if all the gravel and the sand's gone, why not use it for solar panels? So there's a lot of different types of areas where these can be built, including even, if somebody wants to put the investment in for shelters over existing parking lots. Obviously those costs are higher, but that's another use on existing areas. Are there some sites better than others? Absolutely. Again, Ben touched on some of those. You don't want a rocky site facing north. That does you no good. That's not going to be a good spot. But shallow slopes, good soils, kind of big chunks of land, not little skinny parcels and, weird shaped plots of land. But you want a nice, even array of area that isn't interrupted by streams or wetlands and those sorts of things. What are the benefits? Obviously, all the environmental benefits, but from a town's perspective, again, other speakers have talked about it, generating tax revenue, offsetting some of your power costs, those sorts of things. And in a lot of regards, solar may be on the land for quite a while, but again, Ben mentioned the decommissioning plan. A lot of these things, whether the town requires it or the state requires it, they got to pick them up and pull them away when they're done with the project. So then the land can go back to the use that it was before. So it's not a permanent alteration of the land. What are some of the challenges? Wetlands, vernal pools, streams, all those environmental considerations are very important. And those are a lot of the things that developers do day one, is they have a whole list of these are the things we want to stay close to, and these are the things we want to stay away from. So they have that list and they can work with you on those types of things. Again, we've talked about it's a fairly intensive use of the land because you need a fair amount of space per megawatt. But again, it may not be a permanent thing. It can be undone when the project is no longer needed. Again, we had also talked about some of the visual concerns and impacts to agricultural lands. Does it matter where my town is located in Maine, if I'm in Fort Kent or Elliott? From a location standpoint, no. But from a grid capacity standpoint, absolutely yes. That's what developers are looking for. Again, like Ben mentioned, is are you near three-phase power? Is a three-phase power line or a substation on the parcel already? That may rise to the top of the list in terms of suitable sites to develop these. Again, others have mentioned if somebody's got to build a half mile or a mile of line to get to the parcel, that might not be as great. One of the other new technologies that's helping out is battery storage, where we're talking like tractor trailer size batteries that store the energy when it's not needed, but when it's generated, but then releases it when it is needed. So that can really help with grid congestion issues. So if 9 to 5 during the day, there's no capacity in the line when all the sun is shining, but if I can save that power till 2 or 3 in the morning when there is capacity in the line and there's still demand, batteries can help, equate that out some. So that's kind of an exciting thing that we're starting to see. 2 minutes, great. We will keep running through. Can we build a solar project on a landfill? We've already seen, absolutely yes. There's things you need to go through in terms of what type of cap, are there slopes, do we have to grade it, are there holes in the cover already? But absolutely, landfills and brownfields are a great place for solar. We don't have a solar ordinance, do we need one? Nope, you don't need one. Would you like one? Absolutely. Like again, others mentioned, if you would like to steer solar towards things or away from certain areas, that's great. But you don't need them because the state and your other ordinances are going to take care of that. What else do we have? Do we have to sell our land? Nope, not always. In a lot of regards, developers are looking just to lease the land because, say it's a landfill, they may not want to assume all those responsibilities for the landfill itself. If they're looking to put solar on a landfill, they just want to be able to lease or use that land for a period of time, but not absorb all those responsibilities. So you don't have to sell property necessarily to developers to put solar on. Plus, keep in mind with some farms, you may be able to have dual uses. We're seeing some developers interested in sheep grazing underneath the panels. So you might be able to do a little bit of both. Sign us up. Where do we start? Have a conversation, ask questions, talk to folks like us here to help you get more educated, to help your landowners understand, what do I need to do? Who should I listen to? Where can I go to learn more? Where do we start? There's lots of resources out there for towns, including KVCOG, to help you get that started. So thank you very much.
Hello. I've been watching the clock and I can safely say good afternoon now. Good morning anymore. My name is Nick Lund. I work for Maine Audubon. We are an organization working to protect Maine's wildlife and wildlife habitat. We've been at it for a long time, since 1843, if you can believe it or not. We started as the Portland Society for Natural History and have been working since then to do just that, protect Maine wildlife and habitat. And for many decades, we've been supporters of renewable energy. When it was built in the early 70s, was sort of cutting edge with all kinds of technologies, passive solar heating and other stuff, but had a lot of solar panels. And we still have solar panels at our facility here. These are some of the panels we have in our north meadow. But we recognize that at some point, we're still supporters of renewable energy. We recognize the benefits of cutting our dependence on fossil fuels and many other benefits. But we sort of have a fine line to walk. At some point, development and construction has impacts on Maine wildlife and habitat, which is in our mission to protect. And so we're here to sort of help people walk the line between how you can develop solar projects, but do it in a way that minimizes the environmental impacts. And so for us, that means a lot of consideration to siting these things. We've heard about it from some folks already, but we're going to dive back in. To help, we have just released this new report, Renewable Energy and Wildlife in Maine, and we have with it, I know many of you got it, some didn't, I have some extra copies. It's a best practices for low impact solar development document. Find me afterwards if you don't have it. What this does is lay out a bunch of best practices that municipalities mostly can do as they want to develop solar projects in their town to minimize the impact. And so what I'm going to talk about mostly is municipalities developing their own projects. At the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about municipalities working from the land use side on how to deal with commercial projects. What are the recommendations? Number one, you've heard it a couple times, but this is most important from our end. Prefer the use of disturbed, developed, or degraded habitat. That means landfills, that means brownfields, that means roadway medians and edges, parking lots, rooftops, idle or underutilized industrial lands, using lands that aren't really, don't have much value otherwise. Big open spaces like this work great. This is a project in Portland at what I know as Dragon Fields on top of a big landfill. It's about a megawatt size. That's a perfect place. This here is a gravel pit. It was mentioned earlier. Gravel pit installation. This is in New Hampshire. You can see that there's still plenty of room to get the sand and stuff you need, but then the open space there is a perfect place for solar. This is a rooftop in St. George. At the transfer station in St. George, this provides about 90% of the town's municipal power needs just from this rooftop. From our perspective, rooftop solar is the least impactful from an environmental standpoint. These are buildings, it's already been done. So if you can not clear any additional land and put the stuff on the roof, you're far out ahead in terms of that's from an environmental standpoint. And I should say, from a municipality sort of regulatory standpoint, a lot of rooftop solar is not doesn't require additional permits other than sort of looking for structural integrity, things like that. But from a permitting standpoint, this is by far the easiest route to go. So please consider that. I'll mention this too, since we're so close. This is the Kennebec Sanitary Treatment District. This is land adjacent to the treatment facility here, down the slope, so right nearby. So number two is, barring that, if you don't have a brownfield or something else to work on, please basically try to avoid sensitive habitats, right? Make a concerted effort to look at the land you have and avoid the lands that's most environmentally valuable. There are lots of resources that you have to find out where these areas are. I could list them, but I feel like I don't need to. Wetlands, vernal pools, streams, endangered species habitat, a lot like that. One resource, and don't bother trying to decipher this map here, but one resource is a sort of state cooperative program called Beginning with Habitat. This is the map that I sort of screenshotted for Fairfield. But this goes through and shows a whole ton of different habitats, sort of environmental quality and places that are degraded or should be avoided. So check that out. It's beginningwithhabitat.org if you're looking to do that. Of course, avoid if possible intact forests. Cutting down trees to put in solar is not our preferred method. Trees themselves, of course, have environmental benefits. Then we cut them down, sort of mitigate that a little bit. So avoid, if possible, forests. Also, you can minimize your impacts by locating projects near existing development. I think the wastewater treatment plant is a great example that we showed earlier. And also, it was mentioned, that reduces the amount of, ancillary construction you need, whether it's lines or roads or other construction like that. Finally, when you think about vegetation management, and Sadie mentioned this, I was pleased to hear it, think about restoring native vegetation underneath the projects. You guys may have heard about the trouble insects are having, etc. The number one way to help Maine native wildlife is to plant native vegetation, and these fields are a perfect place to do it. 2 minutes. If you can work with Maine Audubon or Wild Seed Project or the state, other organizations that can help you plant native wildflowers, you can actually turn this into a beneficial space from an environmental standpoint when you have to do that. So that's my last slide. The last thing I want to talk about is for municipalities that are thinking about permitting commercial projects. Maine Audubon and NRCM and others are working on a model ordinance that can be used to help guide those projects. I won't go into detail now, but it'll be ready any day now, is my understanding. So please let me know if you would like to get a copy of that when it comes out. Sadie also, of course, has a lot of information there and help. So we're here to help, and thanks for coming.
Now is the time for questions and answers. I want to do a quick couple of announcements before we open the floor. Just a reminder, if you hadn't signed the sign-in sheet, there should be a few going around, and please do that so we can get you the materials as a follow-up. We do have some online listeners, I think, I heard, and our staff will be monitoring if there's any Q&A, so please do feel free to ask those, and they'll get that to me, and I'll facilitate that. And finally, before I open the floor, we talked a lot about brownfields, our various presenters. We do work here at KVCOG in that arena. Each of you had a brochure on your chair, so we can talk about that after the fact, or you know how to reach me since you RSVP for this event. So with that in mind, I'm going to open the floor for questions. Oh, yeah, of course, absolutely.
A lot of the system sizes that we're talking about, there's a bid process that developers have to have their project bid in by July 1st. And so if you don't have a proposal by that date, there's no next bid date set at this time. So just be aware, if your town doesn't have a proposal for one of those larger commercial projects in that size range for that bid process, you're not going to have a project until there's another bid date set if and when the governor of the legislature does that. So just be aware that there's this July 1st date where they have to apply to these projects. The other thing I just wanted to add is that, well, just for context, what we have seen in Belfast is that a 20-acre system, the property owner could expect roughly $75,000 a year in an annual lease payment. So you can see why that number might mean a lot to somebody who's trying to figure out how to make their land work for them. And then based on our mill rate in Belfast, they can expect to pay $15,000 more in taxes because it will have gone from no use or backland value to a commercial value, which is of course much more. So if you subtract that from the $75,000, it's roughly $50,000 in annual income. Again, this is in Belfast based on some project proposals there, but I just wanted to put that out there for context. When you have private property owners who are being approached by developers, that's the kind of, perhaps the kind of number that they're looking at.
Yes, sir.
Those of you who talked about acquiring land, could you just address the possibility of using existing power corridors? The electricity lines are there. There's thousands of acres of land in existing power corridors.
Sure. So basically, any large-scale transmission lines are on land that's either owned by CMP or they have an easement over that land. In my experience working with utilities, they will not allow that. Installing anything in their transmission corridors is a strict no-go for them.
Can you say why?
Basically, because their biggest concern is being able to access equipment and being able to potentially develop in the future on their land. Basically the issue is that if they need to, get something, the line goes down and they need to go back out and replace it, or they need to upgrade something in the future, having a lot of stuff on the ground underneath it would prohibit them from doing it. And they take that very seriously, as that's their number one concern.
I'd just like to follow up on Jim's question. What about underground petroleum pipelines?
That is also, it's a similar concern. It's ultimately a question for the owners of those pipelines who own this land. I think that they would probably, I think they would probably not be thrilled about having stuff on top of their pipelines. I haven't dealt with installing them on pipelines or transmission easements or anything like that, but I know that when we requested to cross existing transmission easements with an access road or an underground wire to connect to the solar project, there's been a lot of pushback and a lot of red tape that have come through before the utilities will accept that. I think that it would be a good use, but I think it's unlikely that the pipeline companies would want to tie up the land like that.
I think that would be a hard no, because you also have the electric system for the solar. And if there were issues with the pipeline, I think there are multiple reasons why there's no benefit in it for the pipeline company. Yeah.
From my perspective, sure, we'd love to do that, but I don't think the owners would do that.
Yes, sir.
So I'm on the Waterville Solar Committee. We're looking to put in a municipal project to power Waterville city buildings and school buildings. One of the issues we're running into is availability on the grid and to interconnect to the grid. We've heard from some private developers that the queue to plug into one of Waterville's 3 substations is pretty backlogged. We've just filed an application to CMP to find out if that's actually the case. Do any of the panelists know what the queue looks like at Waterville substations? And if it is backlogged, what are our options as a city? Do we have to walk away from this because there just isn't availability on the grid? Or could we negotiate with companies or others that have an application in for those substations?
Sure. So I don't know the specifics of the Waterville substation off the top of my head, but CMP does put out a list of what applications are currently active and the status of those. Unfortunately, the grid is first come, first served. So at the first application that gets in gets studied first, and then if that project moves forward, then the next one gets studied, assuming that first one gets built out. What I'll say is that they also just recently put in an emergency rulemaking proposal for interconnection to require that you have site control before you can file an application, and any project that's already in the grid needs to demonstrate that they have site control or they get kicked out. So hoping to cut down on speculative projects. But yeah, there are existing projects ahead of you. There's not a lot you can do other than see if they move forward. There are if the projects do move forward, you can still move a solar project forward. You just may have a higher cost to interconnect. There's also a ongoing PUC rulemaking to determine that look into cost share for like substation upgrades, line upgrades. So if you trigger a large upgrade, projects after you could help pay for that as well and socialize those costs.
My understanding is that once a substation is tapped out, there's no ability to go beyond that unless there were an upgrade. We were told that an upgrade for a substation is roughly $8 million. So for a municipality to take on that cost, it's not going to happen. Whether there's enough developer interest in the municipality, again, I think you're also up at how many applications do you have by that July 1st date. I mean, I think all of those would come into play. It's unfortunate that you guys are up against that because if you have people ahead of you and they're good proposals, you're kind of stuck. So what you could mainly do is smaller systems, but that's going to be so much more expensive.
So question back there, then I'll come to you.
We're from the J Solar Committee, and we're looking at either purchasing RECs from a existing local project coming in locally, or developing our own array. Would anyone like to speak to the pros and cons of the two?
Sure. So if you're purchasing RECs from a solar project, that'll allow you to say that to legally say that you're purchasing solar energy, which is great. But that's unlikely to give you any cost savings. Buying power from another project, in order to make a solar project work, you need to sell the electricity, and typically you need to sell it at a discount in order to find someone to buy it. So buying RECs is a good way to market J as a powered 100% by renewable energy. But looking at either developing a project yourself or purchasing power from a project is likely to give you that and also give you electricity savings.
In Belfast, the largest system that I showed at the end that I said is generating over $100,000 a year in electricity. So that's money we're not paying CMP anymore. That's not on our budget anymore, except for we're using it to pay back a bond for that project. But our RECs are only about $25,000. So that's how much we're making off of that system a year to sell the RECs. So you could kind of think if you're going to spend that, as Ben said, if you're going to spend that $25,000, you're not getting savings. You're just spending money and saying, we're not supporting fossil fuels, which is great, but it doesn't get you the savings. Whereas a system of that size is saving you 4+ times the money, assuming you can find a way to finance that project. And there are different ways to do it, but that's sort of the cost difference between RECs and owning a system.
Sure.
So we're in a small town in Maine with very modest needs. And what's the threshold that one of generation that really needs 3-phase power? And then a corollary to that is if you put it over a landfill and it's a mile from, and it's on to a single-phase line, and there's 4 or 5 houses between there and the phase 3 power. Do we preclude those homeowners from being able to put in a solar?
Do you know how big the system would be that you would install?
Barely more than the homeowner, so I don't know. Dan, do you have some idea?
So maybe like the firehouse roof size system?
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
You don't need phase 3 for that?
Yeah, what's the threshold for phase 3 power? Any idea?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you the exact number, but I think that you could probably get up to about 50 to 100 kilowatts on a single phase power, on a single phase line before needing to reconductor, maybe a little less than that.
Well, I would even say, we have a 121 system on this.
Yeah.
You have a what?
A 121.
121 kilowatts, so in that range.
Okay.
So you're not going to get a megawatt. You're probably not going to get half a megawatt. Depending on the voltage of the single phase line, you might be able to get 100 to 200 kilowatts. Average homeowner system size is about 5 kilowatts.
Right.
So yeah, you could get a slightly larger system. As to whether or not it precludes additional residential development, if you are 100% maxing it out, it's possible, but they do study, on a behind the meter system, you're only exporting some of the time, and a lot of the time you're offsetting existing use. So, utilities should look at that and only consider the incremental export rather than consider the entire capacity. So unlikely, but possible.
Yeah, it's my understanding that if you had enough large systems, say like in Waterville, it sounds like they may be up against this, that take up all their subsystem capacity, that it would not preclude homeowners from doing systems because the size is so different. It just doesn't, I don't know the mechanics behind it, but we were told it would not preclude, because that, when we were doing the ordinance, we wanted to think about that, make sure we're not limiting homeowners from doing their own systems. And we were told that it doesn't prevent the smaller systems from going in. But the size you're talking about, I don't believe would be limiting at all.
Your ordinance is online.
I don't know if it's online yet, because it's fairly new. But I could check in and see.
Gentleman back here, then I'll come to you.
After the profitable limit of the usage of solar panels is over, can those sites be renewed with new panels, or is it decommissioned for everyone?
The answer is either could happen. So at the end of the life of a solar panels don't really break down. They'll just degrade slowly over time. We expect the solar panel that we install now to have a life. It has a warranted life of 20 years, but we expect it to operate for 30 to 40. You know, people that installed solar panels in the 70s, they're often still working. You know, at the end of the project's life, the leases that we do and the permits contemplate decommissioning. It's certainly possible that it will make sense at that point to renew a solar project, but that would require typically a new lease and going back in for a new permit. We also might have figured out cold fusion by then and don't need it.
I'm looking forward to my jetpack. I don't know about y'all.
Are all projects subject to PUC approval?
No.
Based on the size.
So the solar bill that passed did a couple things. One is that it raised the size cap for net metered projects and also raised the cap on the number of community solar off-takers. It also created this competitive procurement for larger commercial projects. So you can do a smaller residential project without having to do anything with the PUC and just install it and get net metering. Most of the larger commercial installers are going to participate in this program, but there might also be opportunities to just do a net metered project, sell it to someone and not participate.
If a number of communities, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The number of communities wanted to work collaboratively on a project on a net metering basis. Would that be subject to that July 1 proposal deadline?
So what the July 1st proposal deadline does is it's essentially they're calling it the standard buyer program, but basically if it's in CMP's territory, we will be entering into a long-term contract with CMP, who will then distribute the net energy billing credits to individual households. The benefit of doing that is that we get to essentially finance the project off of CMP's creditworthiness, so we should have significantly lower rates. I think it would be beneficial to participate in that, but not required. The cap, any project can now receive net energy billing credits if you are up to 5 megawatts AC in size. So there are certainly opportunities for other models here as well if you wanted to get some towns together and have them all buy in.
It also depends on who is actually owning the system. So some of us worked through this bill process to get municipalities exempt from the bid process because we knew that so many municipalities may didn't have the resources to understand how to maneuver that kind of a process. So if it's a municipally owned system, you would be able to avoid that bid process and apply the same way that we would have applied before through the interconnection agreement and possibly PUC if it's a large system.
Gentleman over here had a question. Now come to you.
That
was it? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, my question's a little bit different. In the town of Freedom, we have a fairly large municipal building that's a town garage. And I'm guessing it's right around, 40 by 60. What kind of infrastructure do we need to hold the panels? How heavy are they?
Sure. So something that we look at, it depends on the type of mounting system that you're using. If it's a flat roof, we often use ballasted systems. So basically, you don't do any penetration, just basically install the solar on the roof and put ballast blocks on them. That's a little bit heavier. For standing seam roofs, we just have clamps that we can clamp right onto the standing seam. So that's a pretty light system. That's something that we can, that's like on any rooftop project that you do, that's something that you take a look at and figure out, can the building support this? The answer is usually yes. Most, relatively robust buildings can support the weight of solar panels. The biggest concern, this is exactly what you asked, the biggest concern for solar projects on roofs are trying to match it up with the warranty on the roof, on the age of the roof. Solar panels, projects last for 20 years, typically at a minimum. And the typical roof warranty is also about 20 years. And a pretty large portion of the cost of installing a solar array is the labor. So it becomes cost prohibitive if you have to take the project off, re-roof, and then put it back. So typically we look to do solar arrays on roofs that have been either just newly built or done recently in the last couple of years.
And any local installer is going to be able to do a structural assessment.
Yes, sir.
Do you know anything about the municipal utility providers and co-ops like Eastern Maine Electric Co-op and how they're participating versus just CMP and MRO?
Yeah, they're exempt from the requirements of the solar program, I believe. So they don't have to, they don't have to have net metering. They don't have to participate in the standard buyer program. They also did not raise the cap on net metering participants for the former Maine Public Service Territory, so realistic. That is still, subject to the old rules, although they said that they can look at it. A lot of communities have been, looking at doing solar themselves, and I know some have enabled residential net metering, but I think it's unlikely that you see large scale commercial scale net metering unless the community really wants to do it.
Question over here. Ben, I was kind of curious as to, for grid scale projects, which are looking to ship power in southern New England, to what degree is there a bottleneck heading into southern New England that would constrict that transmission?
Sure, it does exist. I know that a lot of the larger scale wind projects have started to have fairly large, congestion charges essentially associated with exporting power.
Is this the issue in northern Maine?
So northern Maine, the reason that they are, northern Maine is not connected to the rest of the New England grid. Northern Maine, there's no direct connection between Emera's territory and the Emera's territory of Maine Public Service. In order to get power from one to the other, you have to go through Canada. So I think that's part of the reason why they have restricted it, and also I think it's just an administrative burden for a much smaller utility to deal with that.
So to what degree is CMP's New England connection taking up that restricted outflow of grid scale solar into southern New England?
Sure. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Also, most of the solar projects that we're contemplating now are, this is irrelevant because we're trying to sell, all these projects are going to be selling power within the state of Maine. It's, that's certainly an interesting issue, and I don't, but I don't think that's outside of the scope of this meeting.
You all can linger afterwards if you want to get into that sort of stuff. Yes, sir, in the back.
My question has to do with taxes on solar arrays that are privately owned.
Yeah.
Is there any on that, or does anybody know?
Sure. So there was a bill passed in the most recent legislative session that exempted solar panels from personal property taxes in the state of Maine. They are looking at, they're contemplating a bill in the upcoming session to cap that exemption at 1 or 2 megawatts so that the larger scale commercial projects do have to pay taxes, although that's still kind of up in the air. But for smaller residential projects, there's no taxes owed. Like any other tax exemption in Maine, the town will be able to basically get 50% of that back from the state in terms of cost sharing. For like any tax exemption in Maine, towns can receive basically 50% of that from the state of the value of that exemption. So that's the current process, but we're expecting some legislation coming up soon that will clarify this a little bit more.
Do you know if taxation is provided for municipalities yet?
Yeah, so they are working on a form right now, and it actually will go to the owner of the system, and it's their responsibility to provide it to the municipality. So they'll be relying on the developer to plug in a lot of that information. It's not stuff you necessarily know, it's not percent, but it is information the developer would have. And then the homeowner or the developer, if they own the system, would submit it to the town, and then they would process it from there. And then the way the exemption works is it's half of the value times the mill rate. So again, for homeowner, they're looking at $100 to $200. The town is looking at getting that back. The owner of the system, if you're a resident, you're getting the exemption. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
No, could someone comment?
Oh, one more.
The issue is, there's a lot of do-it-yourselfers out there that don't have it installed. That's one of the problems with the rec stuff, is getting the,
Yeah, I agree with you. We actually, we contract with somebody to do our rec sales, so we don't touch it. There are a lot of issues with the way this tax exempt thing is probably going to work out, and I would say I think a lot of people are a lot of parties are kind of unhappy with it. I think it's kind of the least worst enemy right now. It is pretty heavily driven by the installers because, they know how to value a system, and assessors don't really know that, which is why most of them haven't done it, because it's difficult to figure out, because you're not just valuing the system, they're figuring out how is this system affecting the whole property value. So I agree with you, it's not a great system. I think assessors agree with you, a lot of other people do, but it's sort of like, again, what is the least worst option here?
that's the point of.
This gentleman back here.
Could someone comment on municipal system like a school that may be on medium service versus small service, and how the recent legislation changed that mechanism?
By medium service to small service, what do you mean?
Well, I know for a town facility that had some medium service,
Yeah.
you couldn't get direct credits with CMP.
So,
and I thought there was some changes.
we offset our wastewater treatment plant and our police station. There may be one other that's an MGS system or MGS load. And we offset those with some of the power from our larger system. It's not that and I'm not sure how that credit system may change under the new law. I'd have to look into that. But it's not that you can't do it. It's that because you pay less per kilowatt hour at that larger generation, your return is less. So your payback is longer. It may not be the same investment. Again, because it's a school, I think they're exempt from the bidding process. I'm not sure if the size of the system is going to change how the credits are established, but I don't think just being an MGS system or load should prevent you from being able to do net metering.
So one thing I can expand on that is that part of the changes that happened were that previously it didn't make sense, kind of what Sadie is saying, because if you had a demand charge, then you wouldn't be getting $1 credit, you'd only be getting a kilowatt hour credit, and that didn't come with demand charge, and Ben might be able to expand on this more, but though you can have an array that you can't mix a small general service and a medium general service on one array now, you can have an array with multiple medium general services where you are getting $1 credit instead of a kilowatt hour credit, and that's a result of the legislation change.
No, I think that a monetary credit, I think is going to be helpful in offsetting your demand charge. But that was not my area.
Thank you.
Going once? Oh, there you go.
One more question. Can you talk about siting solar on airports? That's one of the things we're looking into in Waterville as a possible site. I think that probably would trigger additional permits such as FAA, but any guidance or best practices for siting solar on an airport?
Sure. So there is a permitting process that you have to go through if you are within. It's not even if it's just on the airport, but within any radius of the airport, a mile or two. That's an FAA permitting process. I don't know a ton about the details, but I just know that part of that is a glare analysis. It typically is fine, and it's a permit that you can get. There are panels on the roof of Logan Airport. What they've done when they've looked at glare, glare is not as much of an issue that you might think on solar arrays, mostly because solar is designed to absorb light rather than reflect it. So the reflectiveness is pretty low, and it's likely that you'll be able to do that. But in addition to any local permitting process, there is an FAA permit process that you have to go through as well.
And there are examples here in Maine, down in Brunswick, on the Brunswick Airport. There are solar panels there currently. Also down in Sanford, at the Sanford Airport, our company has permitted a project that's going to be under construction there shortly, again, on a municipal airport. So it is possible. We're right. There's probably a few extra steps that you have to go through.
I know there's some other towns in Maine that are considering it on the airport because there's so many municipal airports that are big cleared pieces of land, and many of those airports don't use a lot of that land, so it's a good option for towns maybe that have a small footprint.
If they often have to reduce power going there too, it makes sense. Yeah.
Going once, twice, closed. Help me thank the panelists. Normally we share community highlights and other things. It is pretty warm in here. So I will just say, for the good of the order, please let KVCOG know what they can do to help your community. We're here to serve you.